In this lecture, we're going to take up chapters 7 and 8 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And once again, we're going to look at several excerpts from both of these chapters. So, in chapter 6, just to give you a quick recap, Frankenstein was beginning to recover under the nursing of his friend Henry, and he was recovering after he had experienced after he had seen his creation come to life, and he had found out that it was hideous and definitely not to his liking. Following this, there were several fits he went through, and there was a traumatic experience as far as Frankenstein is concerned. And slowly, Henry Clerval, who happened to be in Ingolstadt at that time, his best friend, he nursed him back to health. In chapter 7, we see that Frankenstein and Henry are returning back to their hometown, right? They're returning back to where they are originally from. And we also know that tragedy has struck the Frankenstein family. The youngest brother, Frankenstein's youngest brother, has been murdered, right? And this is the context of this chapter. And in the light of these facts, some from chapters 5 and 6, and a little bit of introduction to chapter 7, where, like I told you, the brother has been murdered. Now we are going to look at several excerpts. So here goes the first one. In the moments leading up to my brother's funeral, I perceived in the gloom a figure which stole from behind a clump of trees near me. So he's talking about a figure that appeared behind a clump of trees near where he was. I stood fixed, gazing intently. I could not be mistaken. A flash of lightning illuminated the object and discovered its shape plainly to me. Its gigantic stature and the deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongs to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon, to whom I had given life. What did he there? Could he be, I shuddered at the conception, the murderer of my brother? No sooner did that idea cross my imagination than I became convinced of its truth. My teeth shattered, and I was forced to lean against a tree for support. The figure passed me quickly, and I lost it in the gloom. Nothing in human shape could have destroyed the fair child. He was the murderer. I could not doubt it. The mere presence of the idea was an irresistible proof of the fact. So you see, there are truths above sense here. When he says the mere presence of the idea was an irresistible proof of the fact, this is something that became, within Romantic philosophy and the Enlightenment philosophy that led to Romantic philosophy. This is a trope, knowing truths above sense, right? In other words, what is truths above sense? Truths above sense refers to when reasonability, when you try to logically deduce something and you cannot, there are truths which cannot be experienced or understood by mere reasoning alone. This is a part of Romantic philosophy, which has a great degree of contribution to Romantic poetry as well. And that idea we see here, right? So to break it down for you further, to bring it in the context of Frankenstein, we don't know whether, at this point, we surely do not know for a fact that the creature itself is the murderer, the creature or Frankenstein's monster, as we often refer to it as. We do not know for a fact that this is the creature who has murdered this innocent child. But then Frankenstein says that no sooner did that idea cross my imagination. What is the idea? The idea that this monster is the murderer. Then I became convinced of its truth. So you see, there is no logical proof yet. Perhaps there will be later, but yet, as we encountered this chapter, encountered these lines, this excerpt from the text, there is no proper evidence that it's the monster who has murdered. But Frankenstein says that no sooner did the idea cross my imagination than I became convinced of its truth. Then again he says the mere presence of the idea was an irresistible proof of the fact. So you see, the presence of the idea is an irresistible proof of the fact, right? Even though there is no first-hand evidence. So this is something, this is one of the tropes in romantic literature, right? And it's called truths above sense or truths above reason. Perhaps in a later class, we are going to talk about this idea in more detail, but let's now return to the plot itself, right? So we know that the brother has been murdered. We do not know who the murderer is, but Frankenstein, who is returning home, encounters the figure of this monster, as he calls it, right? Remember that monster is Frankenstein's words, not ours. We still have not heard from the creature itself. We still cannot conclude what his characteristic is, right? Therefore, whenever I refer to the Frankenstein's creation as the monster, remember it is Frankenstein's words we are using, not our own. Alright, so Frankenstein returning home after his brother's murder, he comes across the creature. And as soon as he comes across the creature, as soon as he catches sight of the creature, he's convinced that no one but this creature could have been the murderer. Notice that the he in the sentence "he was the murderer," in your screens it will be the second last line, the penultimate sentence, right? The penultimate line, he was the murderer, with he written in the uppercase or capitalized. So you see there is an emphasis on he. So when you read it out loud, you should be reading out in that manner, which is expressive of the idea that there is an emphasis on he. So he was the murderer, right? That's the way you should also be reading it. So Frankenstein is convinced that it is the monster and no other who could have murdered, could have destroyed, to use his words, the fair child. Let's move on and see the next excerpt. I considered the being whom I had cast among mankind and endowed with the will and power to effect purposes of horror, such as the deed which he had now done, merely in the light of my own vampire, my own spirit let loose from the grave and forced to destroy all that was dear to me. Okay, so these lines I find particularly interesting because a lot needs to be unpacked here. So here, the overarching idea of this paragraph is that Frankenstein is reflecting on what he has done, right? He is lamenting as to what he has created, right? So if you there's this poem by Robert Southey, which is also a romantic poem, and written during the Romantic era, and this poem is about a pirate, right? And I'll just tell you what this pirate does, and I'll try and show you the relationship between Frankenstein and the pirate in this poem. So this pirate in the poem is called Sir Ralph the Rover, and Sir Ralph the Rover is a notorious pirate, and who then takes a certain sea route, and this sea route is dangerous because there is a rock in that route, and many a ship comes and collides against that rock and then sinks down into the ocean. And a saint from an abbot, right, the abbot of Aberbrothok in the poem, so this saint, this monk, who did not want these incidents of ships sinking into the ocean to continue, he went and tied a bell around that rock. So whenever a ship would come near this rock, the sailors could hear the bell ringing, and from the sound they could deduce that the rock is here and they should avoid that route and take another route, right? Now Sir Ralph the Rover, who is the pirate in this poem, when he takes that route, he cuts that bell, and the bell naturally sinks. And now there is no way for people to know where the rock is, So Sir Ralph the Rover leaves, and then he loots, he plunders. He's a pirate, so he plunders. And during his return journey, he faces this terrible weather, and now even he cannot tell where that rock is, but he's taking that route, right? And he's not even sure where he is. And since he's not sure where he is, where his ship is, he does not know whether he's going to hit that rock or not. And remember, he has it was he who had cut that rope, that bell, and now there is no warning sign. So what inevitably happens is his ship collides with the rock and the ship sinks. And in the last moments of Sir Ralph the Rover's life, he tore his hair, right? And these are lines from the poem. Sir Ralph the Rover tore his hair in despair, right? I may not be quoting the lines accurately, but what I'm trying to tell you here in the context of Victor Frankenstein is that just like Sir Ralph the Rover had cut the rope that was tied to the bell, and that act led to his own doom, right? Similarly, Frankenstein had also endowed the will and power to effect purposes of horror. Among whom? Among the creature he has given birth to, right? Given life to. So this is why this paragraph is of very particular interest when it comes to the character of Frankenstein, and also about the themes of this text. Because let's look at what he has done, what he says now. He says that this creature, talking about this creature, such as the deed which he had now done, nearly in the light of my own vampire, my own spirit let loose from the grave and forced to destroy all that was dear to me. So you see, he compares this creature with his own vampire, right? His own opposite, his own alter ego, right? He's essentially trying to tell us that what I am in life, what Frankenstein is as a living human, this creature is just its opposite. If Frankenstein, the living human, is light, then this creature is darkness, his own vampire, right? And why does he compare it to a vampire? Because remember, a vampire is bloodthirsty, right? And in romantic literature, vampires were quite common. We do not find that in this text, but yes, there is a reference drawn, as you can clearly see here, and that reference has been drawn because Frankenstein compares this creature with his vampire. So he's saying, if I were a vampire, then this would be my vampire. And by this I mean the creature he has given life to. And this creature, he says, it is as if this creature has been set loose upon the world, and I have done it to destroy all that is dear to me. So two more quotations from this chapter. The first is, no one in the family would believe that Justin Moritz was the murderer. Justin Moritz is one of the servants in the Frankenstein household, and she was very dear to the family, and indeed no one would believe that she was the murderer. However, the suspicion of murder fell on her. Indeed, who would credit that Justin Moritz, who was so amiable and fond of all the family, could suddenly become so capable of so frightful, so appalling a crime? Justin Moritz, poor girl. Is she the accused? But it is wrongfully, everyone knows that. No one believes it, surely Ernest. Ernest is another member of the family. No one did at first, but several circumstances came out that have almost forced conviction upon us. So as you can see, this chapter 7, brings a very important moral complication to the text. Also legal complication, because Frankenstein knows who the murderer is. At the same time, no one else knows about the existence of the murderer, right? No one yet is aware of the existence of the murderer. And as Frankenstein himself says in the next quotation, the last one, my tale was not one to announce publicly. Its astounding horror would be looked upon as madness by the vulgar. So he says, if I tried to convince everyone that Justin is not the murderer and the creature that I gave life to is the murderer, no one would believe me. right? My tale was not one to announce publicly, and it was so horrifying and it was so unbelievable that it would be treated as madness. So you see, the circumstances of the murder was such that the suspicion automatically fell on Justin Moritz, right? What those circumstances were, I'm not going to discuss those. You must totally read the text to find what those circumstances were. But know this, that the circumstances definitely indicated that it was Moritz. However, Frankenstein knew for sure he knew that the murderer was not Justin at all. But then again, he could not announce his tale publicly because it would be considered madness. Okay, so like I said, today's lecture is not just on one chapter, it's about chapter 8 as well. So only a few excerpts from this chapter, and this chapter is in a way a continuation of chapter 7, so we can club them together. So the first excerpt goes as follows. I passed a night of unmingled wretchedness. In the morning, I went to the court. You see, the legal proceedings in relation to the brother's murder and in relation to Justin Moritz's conviction is going on, and this chapter is about those legal proceedings and what happens as a result of those proceedings. So Frankenstein says, in the morning I went to the court. My lips and throat were parched. I dared not ask the fatal question, but I was known, and the officer guessed the cause of my visit. The ballots had been thrown, they were all black, and Justin was condemned. Right? So I'm sure you can understand what is going on in here. So Frankenstein has visited court, and he finds that the jury has already decided who the murderer is. They are convinced that it is Justin, and nothing can be done to save her. Elizabeth's heart-rending eloquence failed to move the judges from their settled conviction in the criminality of the saintly sufferer. So Justin is called the saintly sufferer here. My passionate and indignant appeals were lost upon them. So the family does make an attempt to convince the jury that surely Justin Moritz could not have been the murderer, and there has been some mistake, that she is being framed. And of course Frankenstein knows that Justin is being framed, but what evidence does he have? And like he mentioned in the previous chapter, in chapter 7, that his tale was so unbelievable and so horrifying that surely he would be considered mad, and no one would, even if he were considered mad, no one would still believe that there was a creature of gigantic stature whom he had given life to, right? Remember that no one is yet aware of his scientific achievements, right? And at that point in history, surely no one would have believed that a human being is capable of endowing life upon a lifeless object. So Frankenstein's attempts to convince the jury failed. Even Elizabeth's eloquence failed as well. Frankenstein finally says, "This also was my doing, and my father's woe and the desolation of that late so smiling home, all was the work of my thrice cursed hands." You see, Frankenstein now blames it all upon himself. And if you go back to the previous chapter and remember his reference to the vampire, he says that this creature is like my vampire. If I had died and risen from the grave and tried to destroy my family, this is what it would have been like. And this creature, the Frankenstein's monster, right? This represents his own vampire. So here in chapter 8, you see Frankenstein on the verge of breakdown once again. We already saw him suffer in chapter 5 after he had succeeded in his experimentation, right? We already knew that he had been sick for quite some time, and it was Henry who had nursed him back. But upon his return home, nothing seems to go in the right direction, right? Everything seems to fall apart. In fact, his family is now falling apart. His brother has been murdered, and to add further to the suffering of the family, and definitely the suffering of Frankenstein himself, the saintly sufferer Justin Moritz, who surely has not committed the crime, has now been condemned, and she will obviously be executed. So Frankenstein says, this also was my doing. And he essentially curses himself. With that, we end our discussions on chapter 7 and 8.